Hello, I'm going to read you a story by Osamu Dazai, and I do thank Reiko and Doc for sending me this book and also for actually making this wonderful translation. Let's get started. Wish Fulfilled. This is a story from 4 years ago. That summer, I was writing my novel, Romanesque, and residing as a guest on the second floor of an acquaintance in Mishima, Izu. One night, while riding my bicycle through town drunk, I unwittingly managed to cut my right ankle just above the joint. The cut wasn't that bad, but because I had consumed a lot of alcohol, it was bleeding quite profusely. Being at least mindful of that, I hurried to the doctor. The town's 32-year-old doctor was a rather large man who looked somewhat like Takamori Saigo. He was drunk too. In fact, as he made his way through the examination room, not only could I tell he was drunk like me, but also that he'd likely had as much to drink as me. And that made me giggle, which made him giggle, which soon had us both laughing our asses off. From that night onward, we became friends. The doctor preferred philosophy to literature, which I too felt more at ease discussing. So we hit it off. His worldview was something you could call the primal two sides theory, as he saw everything in the world as a single battle between good and evil, clear-cut. I had always clung to a more theistic view of the world, one in which everything fell under the domain of an all-loving God. My viewpoint stood in a stark contrast to the simplicity of the doctor's, and I found his good versus bad battle theory refreshing. For example, to welcome my visit that night, the doctor ordered beers at once from his wife, a request he'd say was good. His wife, on the other hand, smiled and suggested we play bridge instead. To the doctor, such an offering was far less welcoming than bad. Such was how he viewed the world, I must admit. To this particular suggestion I had to give my foremost approval. The wife was built tiny and had a homely face, like an otafuku. Her complexion was fair though, and she was indeed a rather elegant woman. They had no children, but her younger brother, who went to the business school in Numazu, was quiet and obedient, and stayed with them, living in the area above the doctor's office. The doctor subscribed to 5 different newspapers, and almost every day I stopped by during my walk to read one of them for about a half an hour to an hour. I'd enter the house from the back door and sit on the edge of the guest room veranda. There, I would drink cold barley tea the wife would bring to me. While reading a paper, I had to clasp tightly because the breeze would often make it quiver. Outside the house, no further away than 4 meters, was a stream. Its contents comfortably flush against banks, progressing serenely downstream. Every morning, a milk delivery boy rode his bicycle through the narrow path next to the stream and wished me good morning, despite me being a stranger to the area. Often, and just around the same time, a young lady would come by to pick up medicine at the doctor's office. She dressed casually and wore Geta sandals, presenting herself in a nice, clean fashion. She would talk with the doctor, and they would laugh together in the examination room. Sometimes the doctor came to the entrance to see her off, and to offer her encouragement. "Madam, just a bit more patience," he'd say assertively. One day, the wife of the doctor told me the reason for this specific kind of encouragement. The lady was the wife of an elementary school teacher who had some lung problems that began 3 years ago. While much better at this point, he was still at a critical point in his recovery. Sure to remind her of this, the doctor insisted to help him enforce a difficult restriction he'd also put in place. She kept to the doctor's order, but would sometimes feel somewhat sorry for her husband. Stern and resolute, the doctor always said matter-of-factly, "Madam, just a bit more patience," cementing the seriousness of adhering to his direction. At the end of August, the year of my stay in Mishima Izu, I saw something beautiful. One morning, I was reading a paper at my usual spot on the edge of the veranda. The wife of the doctor, sitting sideways next to me, whispered, "Oh, she looks happy." Without giving it much thought, I looked up. I noticed a figure in clean casual clothes with a noticeable bounce in her step, bounding along the path in front of me and spinning her white parasol round and round. The doctor's wife whispered again, "This morning the restrictions lifted." 3 years, I thought. It's a long time. It sounds easy when you say it, but it's still a long time. It was almost overwhelming to think about what she must have gone through. In the years since, and as each year passes, the more beautiful that woman becomes in my mind. I must say, the doctor's wife acting as a marionettist helped me realize this. Now, what can we actually deduct from this story? I feel like we have this idea of Dazai as someone very negative, very depressing, but as Dr. Neko mentioned in this commentary in this book, is that he does actually have lighthearted stories, and that's one of them. And I'd like to actually remind people that although Osamu Dazai, Ango Sakaguchi, Oda Sakunosuke were people who were called Buraiha, they were actually called that by other people, while they themselves called themselves Shingesaku, meaning they actually saw themselves as a continuation of the Gesaku tradition. And for those of you who don't know, Gesaku tradition was based on stories about regular people. It was sort of the low literature, and it treated the everyday topics. We see a lot of the influences in the oeuvre of these writers. For example, Oda Sakunosuke actually have a story called Meoto Zenzai about this couple who goes through a lot of pain and failure, and there is a suicide attempt, which is, I mean, it's pretty tragic, but it just never feels that way because the narration technique is just so optimistic and sort of lighthearted. And it does remind us of kind of Rakugo style of storytelling. And I do believe that Dazai does this as well, actually more often than we think that he does. And this story is a brilliant example, and I do like this little element here. He says that the wife of the doctor had a homely face like an otafuku, and otafuku is actually a mask from Kyogen theater. And while no theater treated these characters who were sort of heroes, famous people, Kyogen theater treated just regular people with their regular lives and regular problems. And otafuku, which is actually a paired mask with Hotoke, they are both very sort of light-hearted characters, and the male one is supposed to be this kind of funny drunkard, and we do see that in the doctor's image here, because the first way he's presented to us, he is drunk, and they both giggle, and that's why they hit it off. And the wife as well, she kind of advocates for just simple joys of life, which is why she's sort of the one who makes it possible for this wife of the teacher to finally get the permission. And I do really like the translation at the very last passage here that uses the word marionettist, but I do also think that that maybe gives her a bit too much agency, and we do think that she's an agent of this all-loving God that Dazai talks about in the beginning. But whether she should be taken this seriously, or whether she is not exactly conscious of the way she sort of transmits this will of the all-loving God and of this just joie de vivre, if you wish, I think that might be debatable. And and also the way alcohol is treated in this story is just a really nice contrast to Ningen Shikaku, or quite a bit of other stories where alcohol is very much connected to depression and very dark issues. So here it's just the way to connect, the way to enjoy things. And another thing that does remind us of Ningen Shikaku, and then also is here more lighthearted, while in Ningen Shikaku is kind of dim, is this primal two sides theory. And I feel that Doctor is actually very much reminiscent of Horiki, who also kind of can be seen as that Hotoko. And they both like drinking and stuff, but the Doctor is not, his image doesn't have that sinister layer, and obviously Horiki is the one who sort of or at least one of the agents who destroys Oba's life. So in here there is still no, no dark side to his personality per se. So this is a lovely story, and I think it does illuminate a part of Dazai that we sometimes ignore. And I do think that if you take something from this video, is that Dazai is he has a very different sides to him, and it's good to just be more playful with just interpretation of his works, and they're not really all that dark and depressing. So thank you for listening, thank you for watching, and if you still haven't read the story, I do highly recommend it. Please buy the book, and yeah, and hope you enjoy more of Dazai.